right. Welcome to this week's Tuesday Live. I am your holistic nutrition practitioner. My name is Lucas Simmons, and I'm based here in the land of Treaty 7 territory at the base of the Rocky Mountains, where the prairie meets the mountains, in a little land called the Foothills. And I'm glad to be here because, good Lord, it's freezing outside. And holy Toledo, I love living where I live. Like right now with the deep cold, it's like -40 with the wind chill factor, as my daughter tells me from the bus this morning. But that ensures that the sky is the best blue you'll ever see. The colors that show up in this super deep freeze are the best. Anyway, I just hope you have a chance to go outside and marvel at the magic around you. So welcome to this week's Tuesday Live. All month long here on the social media channels, we have been diving into the topic of the thyroid. There's a really good reason for it. I am slowly figuring out what I'm about. And I'm sure you're sitting there going, oh, Luca, you've been talking about things for such a long time. How do you not know what you're about? Okay, well, I'm part sloth, first things. Also, second, I'm always reinventing myself. So Lord knows this is not a stop. It's not a final destination. It's just a stop on the tour, maybe. But I'm finally figuring out that I am here to help you in learning the ways that food and nutrition can support you under the burden of stress. And the burden of stress has three components. There's the external stress, which is like, right, the stuff you can't control. We're living in a pandemic. God, that's stressful. Do you have a job? How is the income going? Do you have job security? Do you have money woes? Those are external stress factors. There's the internal stress factor, and that is my specialty. Internal stress is when things aren't working well in the body and you've got inflammation, chronic disease, an autoimmune condition of sorts, low energy, can't digest, those types of things. That is the internal stress. And then there is the emotional stress. And the emotional stress I would tie to mood, anxiety, worries, if those are kind of ruling your day. I would also tie it to the stress of, living in the actual fear that is ramping up in these current day and age, and also the emotional stress if you have a history of trauma or violence in your own life, currently, in the past, or in 1 or 2 generations behind you, because the biochemistry proliferates and continues. So adding the external stress, the internal stress, and the emotional stress makes for a total of what we call your burden of stress. And that's what I'm all about. In the stress feeling of the body and that burden of stress, there's a bunch of things that happens. One of the things that happens is that your thyroid slows down. It's actually the biochemistry of that stress response in the body. And that has come from a land of evolution where some of the stress happened because there was a shortage of food. We lived in a time where, or your ancestors did, where they didn't have access to food. And there was a scarcity. So they had to do a lot of foraging, and the season's return was poor. The extension of seasons was weird, and it was really tricky. So we are no longer in that time, PS. We're not in a time of scarcity. We're actually living in a time of abundance. So anyway, the idea is when you have a high burden of stress, your thyroid actually gets, the function of your thyroid starts to hamper or gets hampered in order to slow down your metabolism. When you slow down the metabolism, your scarcity of calories can now take you further. Oh, we don't have a scarcity of calories right now. We have access to all the foods in the world we want. So this stress response of the body shuts down the thyroid. So when we're talking about the burden of stress, we have to spend an entire month talking about how this is going to impact your thyroid and why your thyroid is the root of all of that stress stuff going on. Because when the thyroid's out, now you start to rely on the backup generator of your adrenals, and now you're starting to impact a bunch of things. So today's topic is carbs, yay or nay? When we're talking thyroid health, give it a think. It's 2021. If you consult 90 out of 100 people who are in the health and wellness industry, 90 people will tell you no. Carbs, no. Carbs are bad. Carbs are terrible. I'm going to be in the 10 people who go, I don't think so. Carbs are good. Carbs are great. Carbs are awesome. In fact, I'm going to make the argument that you need them. And in fact, the fact that we are reducing our carb intake is actually tripping the burden of stress and making it even higher. And let's get into why this is. First things first, this is not medical advice. This is in part explaining some of the biochemistry of the body. If you feel stress keenly, if you have mood stuff, anxiety stuff, thyroid stuff, Hashimoto's, Graves, hypothyroiditis, any type of thing going on, please go get it checked by the medical establishment. This is not meant to be medical advice. It's just diet and food stuff on how to feed yourself to be a good human. First things first. Carbs. Carbs are life. Carbs are life. If you are not getting enough carbohydrates, the gist of the matter is you are turning on the internal stress. And when you're turning on the internal stress response, now your burden of stress from external, internal, and the emotional stress now starts to get out of frame because there's so much. And when that stress ramps up, you actually need more carbohydrates. Interesting, because you burn through it faster. In stressful states, you actually utilize nutrients and a bunch of other things faster. You utilize a lot more magnesium. You burn through B vitamins and vitamin C a little bit faster. You have to produce more hormones to mount that stress response and all of the other things that come in that stress response. So your caloric needs increase when you've got stress. Oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, so I should probably, oh gosh, I have to be careful what I'm saying. Yeah, right? We're not going to talk about intermittent fasting today because that is way out of my field and out of what I can measure and help you move through. So if that's what you're looking for, then hit me up and I'll connect you with somebody who can walk you through that. I will not, sorry. Why do we need carbohydrates? Well, you need carbohydrates. Well, first, what are carbohydrates? Let's make it very simple. Carbohydrates are just ways of storing glucose or sugars. So your body eventually turns all of those sugars and carbohydrates into glucose. And glucose happens to be the preferred source of fuel for every single cell of your body, including your brain, including your eyes. Your eyes actually can only work on carbohydrates. And when you start to run out of the storage of carbohydrates, now you start to, your body goes into panic mode because it fears it's running out of fuel. When you start to run out of fuel, do you know what your body does? Thank you, body, you're the best. You're going to save me from certain peril. Your body turns on the stress response because in the stress response, now you find stored glucose that is stored in your liver and between your muscle tissues, and it pulls it out. That's part of the role of the stress response, is to dig deep, find the stored 400 micrograms of glucose that your body stored as glycogen, take it out, convert it into usable glucose in 1.2 seconds, and use it to get out of harm's way. Awesome. Oops. Did you want to turn on that stress response? No. What you can do with the proper and right thought and approach to this, and this is where working with someone one-on-one can help, but really working on bringing carbohydrates, and you have to start slow. We're not talking excessive amounts. Don't eat a whole box of mac and cheese. That's not going to help you. But bringing in carbohydrates in certain different scenarios can provide that fuel for every single cell of the body, so that you have the fuel ready to go, so you don't have to go, oh God, I'm out of fuel. Please trip the stress response. You're just cutting it off at the pass, and you're through your proper nourishment are stopping the stress response. Why? Because you're eating. What? Carbohydrates bring me joy though, Luca. Of course they do. What grandmother doesn't make cookies for her grandchildren and her still grown children? Or pie. Oh God, my mom makes the best pie in the world. Is it by accident? I don't think so. I think she really super duper loves me. And I think my mother-in-law super duper loves us by bringing baked goods over all the time. Yeah. Now, am I saying go on and gorge yourself? No, I'm not. There is a difference in different types of carbohydrates, sure. Absolutely there is, and we can't pretend there isn't. And your body will utilize them all in different ways, and different carbohydrates, different types of them, will have a different impact on your physiology and what you have that is currently going on for you as an individual in your body. Some people will do better with very simple carbs. Other people can totally handle more complex carbs. And it's exactly what it sounds like. A simple carbohydrate is a simple version of a carbohydrate, and a complex carbohydrate is a complex version, which means there's more molecules all tied together, some that are starch and sort of glucose based, and others that are cellulose based. So it depends where you're at on the spectrum. If you can't digest well, you better not go to the complex stuff, because that's too hard. That is so hard on the body, and it can be problematic. In addition, if you're not properly preparing those types of complex carbs, you have the potential of ramping up the internal stress going on in the body. Yeah. The simpler carbs are one of the ways that you can turn off the stress response in the body by cutting off that stress response at the pass and providing carbohydrates in readily usable form so that your body can have the fuel. Every single cell in your body runs off of glucose, right? So why do we need these carbohydrates? Well, you need them specifically for a bunch of things. So every cell functions on carbohydrates, and carbohydrates provide the energy to your mitochondria to do the ATP cycle. ATP cycle is what you need to have energy so you can move your arms and think and sweat and detoxify and do all the things in the body. Like it's the fuel. It's the fuel for your engine, and your engine is your mitochondria. Okay, well, that's good. Every cell in your system, in your body, needs sugar to function. Unless you're in ketosis, which is a different deal, then you need to go see somebody else. This is not for you. Your mitochondria produce this energy based on this glucose. Why do you need glucose specifically? Let's tie it into more specific ideas. You need it for the liver's detoxification work. Your liver can't do detox work unless there is a steady fuel of glucose. Relies on the stored version of glucose for those who are keeping track at home. You need glucose to do thyroid hormone conversions from T4 to the usable T3 form. So you need to strategically have some carbohydrates somewhere in the day to help support that thyroid conversion so you can have the usable form of T3. When T3 is not there, you're having a hard time making it, you have thyroid issues, now your cholesterol starts to ramp up. Oh, it's one of the ways you can tell. Now, you also need carbohydrates for your brain to function. Its preferred source of energy is carbohydrates. You need carbohydrates for muscle recovery. You need carbohydrates to produce heat in the body, which ramps up your metabolism. When you're in a stress state, metabolism gets hampered down. When you have carbohydrates, it helps because of the production of heat, because carbohydrates as a source of fuel is a little bit less effective than fats and proteins, perhaps, but that's because you're putting off heat. When you put off heat, now you raise your metabolism. When you raise your metabolism, now you get your thyroid back in line. Are you picking up what I'm putting down, friends? Carbohydrates. Yay, yay, yay for the thyroid. First things first, your best first sources, especially if you're struggling with thyroid stuff, I would say roots, fruits, dairy, if you can tolerate, has good amounts of carbohydrates. Honey is brilliant. Maple syrup is another good source. Those are the ones that you could concentrate on. Root veg, fruits, dairy, if you can tolerate. Meat stock actually has a bit of carbohydrates in it. Steak has carbohydrates in it. Like, there's kind of carbohydrates everywhere. Carbs are not the enemy. For those who are digesting really well, you can go to more complex carbs like grains and starches that you'll find in beans, legumes, the whole grains and what have you. Although those require really good digestive fire. If your burden of stress is too high, your digestive fire is really low because stress shuts down digestion. Oh, how do you reduce stress? Oh, you provide carbohydrates. Yeah, roots and fruits, friends. Oh God, like I'm blue in the face. So listen, I have a whole other page I was going to talk about, but don't eat carbs by themselves. Always make sure you have carbohydrates with a fat or a protein or a fat and a protein, never by itself. You need it to be a steady source of fuel, and fats and proteins slowly mitigate out the carbohydrates so you can have a slow release of that fuel. And you want the slow burning fuel. So my friends, if you have any questions on this, there's 82,000 hours I could do more on this. But the gist of it is carbs are not the enemy. And in fact, you need to start wondering, how high is that burden of stress for you? If you need some help to figure this piece out, then book in for a free 15-minute chat. It doesn't cost a cent. Just send me a private message and I'll give you the link. I'll put it in the comments below if I think of it. But really, how you doing? What kind of carb will you reach for today? Hit me up in the comments below. Helps to get the video in circulation as well, because this needs to be about honesty and truth and really how we function as humans. There is zero population in the history of humans that was low carb unless they went into starvation mode because there were no carbs to be had. I'm just saying, let's look to what happened before we showed up, before we tried to get all sciencey. I love the science, don't get me wrong. But how did humans evolve? How did that work? If we mimic more how our humans before us evolved, we'll fare better to move through what we are currently living in a stressful time. Okay, hit me up if you have questions. In the meantime, I wish you a happy week and we'll see you here next week. Salut, à bientôt.